Да, друзья, продолжаем. Следующий доклад «Метрики качества».
Dear friends, let's continue. Next, we will be talking about the quality metrics for playbooks. It will be delivered by Anna Leinikova from Security Vision. She's a product director there. Hello, guys.
Сказал ведущий, меня зовут Анна Олейникова.
As you've just heard from the MC, name is Anna Oleynikova. Now, my first request to you is if you want to ask me questions, please scan the QR code. This way, you'll be connected to the bot where you can submit your question.
Итак, мой доклад касается метрик
Now, my presentation is about assessing the quality of your playbooks. Now, why am I talking to you about that? Well, my company has been doing this kind of work for many years. And you know what? Every time we look at a new SOC, we see the same kind of issues. One of the biggest issues is, in fact, selecting the right action to automate. Selecting the right ways of improving the existing response plans or the playbooks. What happens quite often is that we have pre-configured playbooks or response plans like 3 or 5. We want to improve them, we want to add new ones. But then we don't really have historical data to support new ones. It could be very difficult to, identify what will really work as a response plan for a particular company. Particularly something that would also reflect the particularities of their industry. Very often we do not collect information on the feeds that would help us in this respect. We do not learn enough about services for profit or free that would be required in this or that incident case. In many cases, these decisions are made subjectively. Like, there is a respected member of the team who will say, well, how about we redesign this playbook? I don't think it's effective enough. This is how such decisions are usually made. Moreover, there is a commonly accepted set of metrics and mostly related to SLAs. Like, we talk about criticality, high, medium, and low, and we are expected to respond to them over a certain period of time. Or take, for example, false positives versus false negatives, and, false rates, so to speak. And maybe, you are not happy about the low detection rate. So you can expand your reaction plan, so to speak, if you at least structure it by phases or by types of correlation rules. This way, using modern statistics, you should be able to minimize the human factor. So because of that, we have developed this methodology. I actually did it as my research project for my thesis. And I want to stress here a system-wide approach or method that could help you identify the bottlenecks. To find, for example, too many repetitive or plainly unnecessary actions. All these things can be achieved if you do proper qualitative and quantitative analysis. Now, the first viewpoint, which is about object coverage or asset coverage, is effectively about whether you have done proper analysis of all the objects related to the incident. Well, InfoSec is effectively about context, about relevant and up-to-date information. It's all about whether we have been able to cover with our monitoring all these suspicious objects and take action with regard to the compromised ones, and then decide if we're dealing with a malicious artifact or we are dealing with, say, a system legit process. Like this way, as we've done our investigation, we should be able to rest assured that we've done everything we could. Now, the next metric is related to the playbook as a whole. Now, the response plan or the playbook is usually structured in stages like detection, was that response and so on, remediation. Each of these stages can be statistically analyzed with the view of how, for such an incident type, analysts will usually react and how much time is required.
Отработать. То есть наши аналитики должны провести работу максимальной.
So take malware, for example. We expect our analysts to react very fast to make sure the malware doesn't spread. But if we're talking about a policy violation, here we should be as delicate as we can be, because we certainly do not want to block the account of some VPs simply because the rules were not properly configured. For this reason, statistics on what analysts do and how they go about different incidents over time can tell you if this particular incident has been properly processed or not. The same is true for frequent activities or longitudinal processes. So, for example, the long-term ones can be analyzed, while the repetitive ones can be automated or worked around. Another metric which I personally love is that at the lessons learned stage, particularly if we are having a false positive incident. So, for example, the correlation rule will always provide false positives under certain conditions. So, having collected a lot of statistics on such false positive incidents, we should be able to find some not so obvious correlations. And, under such and such conditions, it always generates an FP, and then include these conditions in the correlation rules, or do an exception for them so that we reduce the FP rate.
Результативность действия то же самое про Playbook, когда мы уже оцениваем
конкретные
действия на конкретном этапе в рамках
of the actions we take as part of the playbook with regard to specific kind of incidents. So, for example, there was like a brute force attack. First, there were 10 unsuccessful attempts followed by the 11th, which was successful. So, if the incident was like true positive, and we do know that the domain that initiated it all was a malicious, it was not legitimate, and the account was hacked, well, then we should be able to analyze all of our augmentation sources. Then we should be able to see which of the feeds told us that this IP address was indeed malicious, which of the analytical services provided the right information, and or whether we actually need UBA or maybe CM here to learn more about the overall context of the incident. So this statistics provides information on what kind of security measures are particularly useful and relevant, as they support our verdict. So previously we've been talking about how extensive or how integral your investigation is, as well as your response plan. So one more type of metric, so to speak, is the human factor. So what does the analyst himself do? So we have proposed 9 actions. If our analysts only do like 3 out of 9, then we should either narrow our response plan down. Oh, by the way, I should also thank the organizers. We had those rehearsals here that helped me a lot. So they told me that, well, maybe out of those 9, some activities are optional. Maybe we can keep them as part of the playbook, but just indicate they're optional. In most cases, they won't really be needed. So maybe you will discover that, besides those 3 out of 9 actions in the playbook, the analyst always does 2 more things, and maybe they're so good you want to add them to the playbook. Success or success rate of these actions. Now, if a particular action provides us with additional information, for example, it helps us ascertain the status of an object as malicious or not, or changes the status from, say, malicious to non-malicious, or if it provides us with the objects of the incident, expanding the landscape, showing how the infrastructure, for example, was infected as a result of the attack. Or, in general, enriches the context with additional data, that should be considered a useful thing.
Пример применения этой методики непосредственно на каком-то
In conclusion, I want to show how this methodology could actually be applied to specific scenarios, such as infection with
В
malware.
рамках детектирования можем пойти по false positive, по true
So,
positive.
as part of detection, we can,
Сопоставление инцидента и объектов.
show it as two branches, true positive and false positive. Then, as we compare it to the core rule, and the correlation rule, and we may discover that, okay, the correlation rule needs to be adjusted if it's a true positive incident.
Предложено 6 действий.
We actually have 6 actions proposed for sort of stopping it from spreading.
Или проверка в аналитических сервисах, как правило, занимает время. А заражение
Naturally, it takes time for you to check if it sits in any particular list. But if we're talking about malware, we are expecting to react very fast.
Либо вообще исключить на текущем этапе, ну, в принципе, в рамках, или поместить их куда-нибудь там.
So some actions can be skipped or at least kept until later.
Что достаточно часто
And shown in the blue square here, you will see that analysts will often do this checking for whether it's mass or not. If it's not listed in your playbook, it could be a good idea to add it to some automated routine. Now, the next stage is the analysis itself. At this stage, we will be looking in retrospect, and we'll also be looking at the context, looking for additional digital artifacts and other pieces of evidence which we can then feed to the TI. And, this way you learn if it's malicious or not, and whether it makes sense for us to include it in the incident landscape. So, if in reality we see that some objects generated by the retro search in the context of this particular technique or this threat, continue emerging on a regular basis, well, because it's malware, right? They get modified very, very fast, and the threat landscape is certainly very, very dynamic. Because, for example, they use, new obfuscation tools in order to, generate new artifacts. So if we see that in the context of this particular malware infection, they're also using, new tools for getting hold, then we will go to the correlation rules and introduce changes in the detection segment, which means that if we are more systemic and more methodical, so to speak, about analyzing our response plans, we should be able to improve significantly, and we should be able to introduce some safe automation. We should also be able to increase the efficiency of our tools. This way, the whole shebang can actually, deliver much more value. So this way we should be able to optimize our costs and maybe restructure the workload, because, we keep complaining that we're strapped for talent. But, if we do this, we will be able to address this issue as well, because this way our analysts will be able to delegate some of the current workload to automation. This is it for me now. Thank you.
Да, спасибо большое. Пару вопросов. Первый вопрос от себя.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Couple of questions.
Доклад.
I've listened to your presentation with a lot of interest.
Пожалуйста, а можно ли предложенные метрики использовать
Do you think the same metrics
некой оценки того, какие действия нам надо автоматизировать, какие нет?
can be used in order to decide what to automate and what not? How do I make such decisions? Yeah, right. That's one of the key ideas of my presentation. This is where I actually started. When you see the same activities performed, in every incident response, then you should be able to see the boundaries for them. You will see how this, response routines or containment measures are deployed. And you should also be able to see, how you can mount them without impacting the production processes. So historical data will tell us of a lot of conditions for how we can do all this in an automated way safely. We have time for one
Насколько вообще
question.
в текущем, на текущем
what
этапе
extent
развития плейбуков можно говорить о том, что плейбук
can we
— это конкретный
claim
набор действий?
that a playbook is actually a specific list of actions? That's a good question. Thank you.
И здесь,
That's
возможно,
certainly a
имеет
pain
смысл,
point.
в принципе, вставать на потоки в
I
контексте
believe
того, как
it makes a sense
аналитики,
for
крутые
us,
экспертные аналитики,
makes sense
которые у
for
нас
us
работают, ведут себя в контексте того или
to
иного
drop such,
типа инцидента.
you may want to
Это
look
даст нам
at how the
возможность
best
составить
analysts
новые
respond to
планы
this or that
реагирования
incident.
и
This way, you
сохранить
should be
экспертизу
able to
наших
develop
аналитиков даже в том
new
случае, если они
response plans
внезапно захотят покинуть
and,
нашу компанию.
retain the
Статистика
expertise
сформирует
your
нам
best people
новые
have
планы
if
и даст
they
возможность обогатить
unexpectedly
пакет
decide to leave.
корреляционный движок в том числе.
So this way, you will be able to significantly improve your correlation
Как
engine.
работают лучшие наши эксперты.
Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Thank you.